You're listening to Conversations with Kathy, podcast for women who are looking for a place filled with honest conversations, tangible takeaways, and new perspectives on life, love, and everything in between. And I'm your host, Katyan Roach. Let's jump right in. When I started this podcast, I wanted to create a safe space for conversations that could sometimes be difficult. Yes, it is my goal to inspire and encourage, to light a path to hope. However, I also know that this road is oftentimes rocky, that sometimes conversations and stories shared are uncomfortable, but they must be had. The questions around sexuality in the Caribbean are multifaceted. We are a spicy people, from the way we flirt, the way we dance, just the essence of who we are. Yet so many topics are still taboo, including the discussions pertaining to the LGBTQ community. In this week's episode, my guest remains unnamed, for in spite of coming out to friends and family, she is still not willing to bring any more discomfort to those who still struggle with her truth. I am committed to speaking to all women on all topics. I believe that there are lessons in every story, and I believe that there is always someone on the other end who needs this moment, who needs to know that they are not alone. Please be advised that this episode contains content and language that may be uncomfortable for some.
I always tell people I always knew from a very, very early age. I always knew that I wasn't like everybody else, like all the other girls that I knew. Because I remember from a very young age when all the other girls would be talking about boy bands and which boy they thought was cute. It never struck me as a boy being cute. I remember thinking that my favorite music band was the Spice Girls.
Right.
Everybody else's favorite band was Boyz II Men or NSYNC. And though at that age I didn't know what that difference was, because it wasn't a conversation that was ever had in my house, because my family is a very religious Roman Catholic family. It wasn't a conversation that was ever had. It wasn't until I got to high school that I finally found out what that difference really was and what it meant. And for me, that led to a really, really big struggle. Because I grew up in a Roman Catholic household and because I myself was very religious and I still am, it led to a very big inner turmoil because I couldn't reconcile the way that I felt with the way that the things that I was taught.
Right. Now, is it that, because we know in most Caribbean homes, we don't, and in most homes, I guess, across the world, not many parents sit and talk about sex. So is it that in your household, they didn't talk about sex at all? Or did they talk about sex from a perspective of it's not something you do until you're married? Or did they even talk about homosexuality?
My mother gave me the sex talk when I was younger. To be very honest, my mother's sex talk was very scientific, and it kind of made me never want to have sex. But my mother's sex talk was heterosexual, a man and a woman.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about homosexuality in my household. It was only when I was in my late teens, maybe 16 and older, that there was anything ever discussed about homosexuality.
Right.
And it wasn't a very, very good conversation.
Right.
But growing up in the Roman Catholic faith, you learn that relationships are between men and women. And you have to get married and have kids, and that's what God intended.
Yeah.
So as a teenager who was not attracted to men in any format, like, I have really great male friends.
Yeah.
But I've never been attracted to men.
Did you try to date? Did you try to date to figure it out?
I did. I've had boyfriends.
Yeah.
But I wasn't attracted to them. I remember because of peer pressure and the fact that I was Roman Catholic and I couldn't reconcile being gay with being Roman Catholic and how I was raised, in a sort of a last ditch effort to not be gay, I went out and got a boyfriend at 16, and we ended up breaking up because he wanted sex, and I
Right.
told him no
Mm.
because I wasn't attracted to him.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have sex with him. I didn't want to be naked with a man.
Yeah.
And he tried to pressure me into it, and I wasn't having that. And
Yeah.
I remember being very upset because he started spreading rumors about me because I wouldn't give him sex. It's funny now at this age when I look back at it, I find it hilarious because the rumors he was spreading turned out to be true, but he didn't know that.
Right.
And it was upsetting for me at the time.
Right.
But that was when I was 16, and it basically cemented in my mind that this is who I am, and no amount of praying or wishing or hoping was going to change that.
Yeah. Yeah.
After that, I had my first foray into dating women. It wasn't always easy because Trinidad is such a closed-minded society, and it's difficult to find, especially as a teenager who's still scared of looking. It's difficult to find women who
Yes.
are interested. But I remember the very first time I kissed a woman, it was like fireworks and finally understanding what everything really meant.
Right. Now,
You
some
know,
people that just to get rid of a little bit of the stigma. Some people don't believe that you are born this way. They think that there must have been some sort of influence, some sort of abuse. People have all of these reasons because they can't, in their mind, especially from the religious perspective, believe that, quote unquote, God created you this way. They feel it's a choice. And for me, I feel nobody necessarily chooses a lifestyle that will
you don't
bring,
choose a lifestyle,
yeah,
as I tell people, especially in the Caribbean. From a Caribbean perspective,
yes.
I can't speak to first world countries,
Mhm.
or any of the other countries, but in the Caribbean, because of the society and the socialization that you get as a Caribbean individual,
Uh-huh.
nobody is going to choose something
Yeah.
that's going to make everyone you know hate you.
Oh, yeah.
You're not gonna get up one day and think, hey, I want everyone that I've ever known my entire life to hate me or disown me.
Yeah.
And I've known people who have been thrown out of their homes as teenagers because they're gay. I've known individuals who've been beaten up by their own families because they're gay.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to choose that.
Yeah.
So many people in Trinidad and the wider Caribbean still hide and live lives that are complete lies because of the fact that our society is so unaccepting of the LGBT community even
Yeah.
to this day.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the religious community, as I said, I struggled for a very long time with it.
Mm-hmm.
From the moment I understood what it meant up until my best friend sat me down. Because I finally came out to my best friend when I was about 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And I remember being so scared to tell her because I was afraid that she would stop being my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while of watching me struggle, she sat me down and she said to me, do you believe that God made you just the way you are? I was like, yes. And she's like, do you believe that God loves all of the creatures that he has made? I was like, yes. And then she said to me, okay, well, if God made you and God loves everything that he's ever made, why would he make you to hate you?
Yeah.
And it was like someone turned on a switch.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that if I truly believed what I was raised to believe, that God is a God of love and we're all made in his image, then one, God doesn't make mistakes. He makes you exactly the way you are for the journey that He has planned for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if He's a God of love, then He's not going to make you the way you are to then turn around and hate you for it.
Yeah.
That, for me, was the epiphany to reconcile my sexuality with my religion. And yes, the Roman Catholic religion still has its issues with homosexuality, though this new pope is taking some very interesting strides in the right
Yes.
direction.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it was a personal struggle, and that is what really helped with a lot of my angst over being gay.
Yeah. So now you're 18, you've told your friends. How do you tell your parents? Why do you tell your parents?
Well, I didn't tell my parents for several years
Yeah.
after that, because somewhere in my late teens, I can't tell you the exact year, I remember sitting at the dinner table. This is after I understood who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting at the dinner table with my family, and my mother said, "Those people in Uganda have the right idea. We should take all homosexuals out and hang them."
Wow.
And I'm sitting there looking at her like, wow,
Yeah.
really? It was all over the news that the death penalty was to be applied to being gay.
Mm.
And to have my mother sit there across the table from me and say that, I honestly didn't think I would ever come out.
Yeah.
Because I was mortified. You know, that was her opinion.
Yeah. So what eventually caused you to tell them? And how did you tell them?
Several years later, other members of my family found out, mainly on my father's side, because most of my father's family moved away and have their lives away. So a lot of my aunts and uncles and cousins on my father's side all live in Canada.
Right.
So for them, they saw it because they're accustomed to seeing it.
Yes.
They're accustomed to it being there all the time, and it was never an issue for them. They didn't care.
Yeah.
Because it's so normalized that, you know, that's just how this person loves.
Yeah.
So they saw it, and to an extent, it was a relief to be able to talk to members of my family and have them accept me and know and not have to worry. But one of my cousins said to me, "Your aunt knows." And that worried me, because in every family you have this one relative who just doesn't understand that some things are meant to be kept a secret.
Yeah.
And
you'll have that
she
one.
is that relative.
All right.
She's the one that's gonna blab in the middle of the family gathering, and everybody stares at her like, "You're not actually supposed to say it out loud." And my cousin told me that she found out, or she figured it out, or whatever.
Yeah.
And this was a few months before she was supposed to be coming to Trinidad, along with several of my relatives. They were all coming to Trinidad. I think it was for my uncle's 50th birthday, or might be less than that. Anyway, and I started to panic.
Yeah.
My parents didn't know. And well, I know her. She would just say it and not realize that, hey, maybe not everybody knows.
Yeah.
I thought about it for a while, and I said to myself, I would rather they hear it from me than have it blabbed unknowingly in casual conversation in the middle of this family gathering. And me being me, I'm an over planner.
Right.
So I remember talking to one of my cousins who knew. She lived here, and I remember telling her that I was going to tell them.
Right.
And that if I called her in the middle of the night, it meant she had to come and pick me up, because I'm not going to be crashing on her couch because they threw me out.
Wow.
Because I was convinced that they were going to throw me out.
Yeah.
Eventually, I summed up the courage, and I said to my parents, I have something to tell you, and I'm not sure how to tell you, but I have to tell you.
So you had a little family meeting. You sat them down and you... Okay.
I sat them down in the living room, and I said to them, I'm gay. And they both looked at me like I grew an extra head.
Yeah.
that I started speaking in some language they didn't understand.
Yes.
And while everyone said to me, "Oh, your parents know they're just in denial," there's the look of denial, and then there's the look of, "What the hell are you talking about?"
Yeah. They're processing this information.
And that was the look I was getting. I was getting the, "Where is this coming from? What
Yeah.
are you talking about?" Look. And after about 5 minutes of them staring at me like I grew an extra head, my mother jumped up, and I remember her yelling at me, "How could you do this? Don't you know how this is going to look for me? How this is going to make me look?" And in my head, I couldn't understand, why does this make you look anyway? It's my life.
Yeah.
And she stormed off, which I later learned was her storming off to call her priest.
Oh, yeah.
And my father just turned back and started looking at television and proceeded for several months to basically act as if I stopped existing.
Wow.
My mother came back from her conversation with her priest and yelled at me that I was the biggest disappointment of her life, and that it was disgusting, and that I was never allowed to bring anyone into her house ever again. Then she just stormed off. And I remember standing there in the living room thinking, okay, I didn't get kicked out, but I don't know if this is any better.
Yeah.
After that, for about 6 months, it was like I stopped existing. No one spoke to me. And at the time, I was still in university full-time. I was living with my parents. I was not working. So, in essence, I was dependent on my parents for everything. But it was like I stopped existing. They stopped giving me spending money or money to travel. My mother stopped leaving food. Like, she would make lunch and leave, because they would leave before I left, because I generally didn't have a class until about 9.
Yeah.
She stopped leaving food for me for lunch. And she stopped leaving dinner for me, because I would generally get home after 9 because I had late classes. And it was like I stopped existing. I remember the first night I came back and there was no dinner. It was clear that everyone had eaten.
Yeah.
Because they were freshly washed wares.
Yeah.
There was no food. And I made a sandwich. And the next morning, my mother burst into my room and told me I wasn't to touch anything that didn't belong to me.
Wow.
And I think during that period, if it hadn't been for the fact that I was in a relationship at the time, I don't know how I would have made it through, because after a couple of days of just trying to make do with what I had, I ran out of money.
Yeah.
Because university ain't cheap.
Yeah.
And traveling is not cheap.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, the first or second time I'd seen my then girlfriend since my parents stopped acknowledging my existence. And I remember she brought me food, and I remember thinking, oh, thank God, because I'm so fucking hungry. After she left and I went to my other class, I was leaving university for the night, and I opened my wallet. She had left money in my wallet, unbeknownst to me.
Yeah.
And she proceeded to do that for the months to come. And I think without that, I don't know what would have happened to me.
Yeah.
I really don't know what would have happened. And then one day it just changed. And it changed in a really hilarious way, because after about 6 months, this is now leading up to Christmas. And generally for New Year's, my parents would have this really big open house type line.
Yeah.
All of their friends or family, and each of us would invite our friends.
Yeah.
But of course, I had told all of my friends, my mother said, not allowed to invite anyone into her house ever again. So they all knew when they understood. The usual New Year's Day line was off.
Yeah.
The funny part came because my best friend has been my best friend since Form 2 of high school. And her parents and my parents became friends because we're best friends. And in high school, your best friend is always in your house, or
Yep.
you're in their house.
Yeah.
You're going here, there, and everywhere. So my parents and her parents became very good friends. And my mother turned to me one day out of the blue after not speaking to me for God knows how long,
Yeah.
and said, "Is so and so coming?" And I'm like, "Well, no."
Hmm.
She was like, "Why?" I'm like, "Well, you told me I'm not allowed to invite anyone into your house."
Yeah.
So I told everyone, they can't come. And she got mad and she's like, "I didn't mean them."
Yeah.
I was like, "Well, that's not what you said."
Mm-hmm.
So I was just following your rules. And she said, "Well, no, they can always come." So I then turned around and told my best friend that she was invited.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, my mother just was speaking to me again.
Yeah.
Of course, it was never mentioned, but she was just speaking to me again.
As you look back on it now, what do you think they were dealing with? Did you, or have you ever had a chance to talk to your parents about what that moment meant for them? I agree with you when you say your coming out wasn't about them, but what do you think they were? Can you imagine, or have they ever said what they were dealing with in terms of how they felt in that moment?
No, I completely understand that my coming out is not what you expected or what you envisioned for my life as a parent. I get
Mm-hmm.
that. And I expected worse, but I knew that even if the worst didn't happen, there was going to be a period where they had to come to terms with it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine because I had to come to terms with it. And it's my life, it's my story,
Mm-hmm.
right? For me, my biggest issue was the way that they did it. And for several years after, even though they were speaking to me, it was as though, yes, they're speaking to me, but that was not to be mentioned. That
Yeah.
was not to be acknowledged. That was
Yeah.
not to be, it didn't exist in their
Right.
world. And any mention of it, it was like someone short circuited their brain. And it was a huge issue.
Right. Are you saying that
And
you've never had that? You still to this date haven't
it's
had a
not a conversation
conversation?
that we've ever had.
Yeah.
I'm 34. I came out when I was 21.
Hmm.
It has been 13 years,
Yeah.
and it has only been in the last 2 to 3 years that I can even have a conversation about it
Yeah.
with my mother.
Yeah.
And I found out later on that my mother's been trying to pray the gay out of me. I think she still is to an extent, but I'm not sure. But she's been for the last decade or so trying to pray the gay out of me.
Yeah.
I think that interesting and funny because no matter how much praying she does, it's not going to magically change who I am. I'm not going to magically wake up one day and go, "Hey, I think I'm going to marry a man."
Yes.
It's not going to
Yeah.
happen
Yeah.
because I did my own praying as a teenager for this to not be who I was. I remember a week or so after I came out to my parents, my godmother called me, and I thought, "Oh God, here we go again." My
Mm-hmm.
mother's told her, and I'm about to get this all over again from my godmother. And my godmother called and she said, "What are you doing on so and so day? I'm coming to pick you up because we have to talk."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I stressed over that
Yeah.
and I was super anxious. And she picked me up and we sat in her living room and she said to me, "Is it true?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she's
Yeah.
like, "Are you gay?" And I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Yeah, it's something I've known for a while."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Okay." And I remember her telling me that it didn't matter to her that I was gay, but what upset her is the fact that I didn't tell her and my mother didn't tell her,
Mm-hmm.
that she had to find out from a friend of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And she was upset because nobody bothered to tell her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I came out to my mother, I thought that my mother would tell her
Mm-hmm.
because they're sisters.
Yeah.
And I just assumed that my mother would tell her. So we had an entire conversation. And at the end of it, it was such a stark contrast to what I'd gone through with my mother.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they're not just sisters, they're identical twins.
Okay.
And the complete contrast between the two of them was shocking for me. My aunt didn't have a problem. It didn't change the way she saw me. It didn't change anything about our relationship. The only reason she was upset was because of how she had to find out.
Yeah. That she didn't know. I know that you've said, well, I said it. We're not trying to make you the poster child of the LGBT community in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well,
However,
that's not even possible.
however, I would want you to speak directly to maybe a parent, because who may not be even considering that this is a possibility, or just to be able to have the conversation with their kids about sex, sexuality. What would you say to them? What would you say to a parent listening about having these types of conversations with their child?
I would say that even though it's difficult for you to imagine this completely different life for your child, and even though it's hard, and it being hard is understandable, and it's always going to be difficult because of the socialization that we are given, that this heteronormative socialization, that you need to just for a moment step outside of this place where it's not what you wanted and you're struggling with it, to remember that as much as you were struggling with it, they're struggling even more, because we are all socialized to believe that heterosexuality is the only way. And when you realize that how you feel and how you think and how you understand and interpret love and attraction does not fit into that only way, you were thrown into a tailspin that sometimes takes years to comprehend. And when you, as a parent, add your own issues and your own struggles with it to that child, it can do such psychological damage. Because to the child in that situation, when their parents can't seem to accept, it's as if your parent is saying, I don't accept you. And I would say to the parent that even though you're struggling, and even though you don't understand or you don't fully accept in that moment, remember that this is your child and love them no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to us as a community, for the wider community, for many who still struggle with the acceptance?
I mean, Trinidad's watchwords say it all: discipline, production, tolerance. And as a nation that is so accepting of every creed living in harmony, it should be, and I say should, it isn't, but it should be easy for us to be tolerant. Even if you don't accept, be tolerant of someone who doesn't live according to your ideals. If we as a nation could accept different religions living as one, different cultures living as one, different races living as one, then different lifestyles should be able to be tolerated. We have the foundation for it because we are a nation that could be put up as a racial, cultural, religious ideal of integration and tolerance, because nowhere else in the world you're going to drive down a street and drive past a church, a mosque, and a mandir
Yeah.
on the same street.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere else in the world are you going to walk into a neighborhood and see children playing from Muslim, Hindu, Chinese, white, African descent,
Mm-hmm.
all playing, all going to the same school.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a person's house for Diwali or Eid, and they invite everyone, whether you're Christian, Muslim, atheist, it doesn't matter. You are welcome, you are fed, you celebrate with them.
Yeah.
And this is something that you don't have anywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, you see them struggling. And this is with neighborhoods that are miles apart from each other.
Yeah.
But somehow, even though as a nation we have such beautiful integration on all those other lines, the idea of a person loving differently seems to just generate issues.
I created this space to have honest conversations. So I hope that after listening to this, there is going to be somebody who was thinking in one particular way is going to actually say, okay, maybe I should open my mind to actually thinking about this another way. That is my hope. So I just want to again thank you so much for taking the opportunity to share your story with me.
No problem. I'm glad to be part of the conversation.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Kathy. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. It helps others just like you to find the show. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Katyan Roach, or in my Facebook group, Conversations with Kathy, where we connect live, discuss the episodes, and share tips for improving our lives. So until next time.